Hi, I'm Clara Reynolds. My family erased me like a typo in their legacy. My parents handed the company to my sister and handed me a suitcase. I lost everything: my name, my home, even the right to belong. I was sleeping behind an abandoned factory when a man in a black suit found me. He said, "Are you Clara Reynolds?" I barely nodded. He smiled. "Your late husband left you his entire estate. Vineyard, building, $82 million? But there's one condition." What he said next. It didn't give me my life back. It gave me a war. Before we dive in, what time are you listening and where from? Drop a comment. Because this story, you're going to feel it. The elevator doors opened to the top floor, and for a moment, I stood still. The polished marble reflected my shoes, the same pair I'd worn on my first day here 12 years ago. Back then, I'd felt proud, nervous maybe, but full of purpose. Today, I felt weightless. Like I'd already been erased before even stepping through that glass door. It was mid-morning in Chicago, one of those crisp spring days where the light feels too bright, too honest. I had come early, hoping to review my notes for what I believed was a meeting about my new project proposal. My heart was still clinging to the idea that maybe, after the divorce, this project would be my comeback. My parents had agreed to meet with me. Rebecca had even texted, "Let's make this a new chapter, Clara." The moment I entered the conference room, the air changed. My parents sat across the long table, faces stiff, unreadable. Rebecca leaned back in her chair, her manicure gleaming against a stack of folders, and at the far end, two men in suits I didn't recognize, papers neatly arranged before them. "Clara," my father said, his tone clipped. "You're early." "I thought we were reviewing the West Loop expansion," I said, forcing a polite smile. No one returned it. He cleared his throat, then picked up a typed statement. "Effective immediately, Rebecca will assume full leadership of Reynolds Holdings. Clara has agreed to step down." For a second, I thought I misheard. The room seemed to shrink, sound fading around me. "I've agreed?" I repeated, my voice low. One of the lawyers pushed a document toward me. "Signed and dated 3 months ago," he said flatly. My eyes caught the familiar blue ink. My name, my signature. I remembered it now, that afternoon when Rebecca had stopped by my office. "Just updating some records for tax filings," she'd said, smiling. I hadn't even read the fine print. My hands felt cold. "This is fraud," I whispered, but the lawyer only folded his hands. My mother avoided my eyes. "Everything was reviewed," my father said, his tone final. "It's done." Rebecca leaned forward. "You've been carrying too much, Clara. This will be easier. For everyone." I stared at her. "I built the first foundation of this company. I started it from a borrowed office above a hardware store." She smiled, calm, polished. "And we thank you for that." That sentence hit harder than a slap. No one moved. No one spoke up for me. I could hear the faint hum of the HVAC, the soft tap of Rebecca's pen on the table. I wanted to say something sharp, something that would make them regret it, but the words wouldn't come. Then my father added, "You were never meant to lead anything, Clara. Leadership isn't for the sentimental." There it was. The verdict. Something in me went still. No tears, no trembling, just a hollow silence expanding in my chest. I gathered the papers slowly, placed them back on the table, and stood. "I understand," I said. The words came out steady, though my throat burned. Before I could leave, one of the lawyers cleared his throat. "One more thing, Ms. Reynolds. Your apartment on Lakeview. The ownership transfer has been finalized. It's under Rebecca's name now. For tax efficiency, of course." "For tax efficiency?" I nodded once. Of course. I walked out of that room, past the framed photos of company milestones, photos I had taken, moments I had lived. The hallway felt longer than I remembered. My reflection followed me in the glass walls, fading with every step. In my office, a small box sat on the desk, already packed. My assistant must have known. Inside were a few personal things, a half-empty mug, an old notebook, and the blue ink pen I'd used to sign our first partnership contract. I turned it in my hand, the weight of it grounding me. That pen had once meant creation, hope. Now it was the only thing left that still felt like mine. I placed my employee ID card face down on the desk. For a moment, I looked out over the city, the skyline I had once helped fund, shape, and dream into being. Chicago was still bustling, indifferent, alive. As I walked toward the exit, I caught my reflection again in the glass door. The woman staring back looked unfamiliar, not broken, just gone. When they erased my name, they didn't realize I still remembered how to write. Outside, the wind was sharper than before. A light snow had started to fall, the kind that melts the moment it touches the ground. I pulled my coat tighter and stepped into the street. The city didn't care who you were, it just kept moving. The snow had started falling heavier that night. I didn't go home. I didn't have one to return to. 2 weeks later, I was still in South Chicago, camped out behind an abandoned textile factory. I remembered driving past 100 times when things were normal. There was a time I wouldn't have even glanced in its direction. Now, its crumbling brick walls and broken windows felt like shelter. I had layered 2 torn blankets over my coat, trying to keep the wind from slicing through me. My back pressed against rusted metal, cardboard tucked beneath me like a false promise. I'd tried a motel that first night. I'd thought, just for now, just until I figure out what to do next. But when I handed over my credit card, the man behind the plexiglass looked at me like I was trying to scam him. The transaction declined. Twice. I tried another. Same thing. Later, I found out why. The accounts I used for years had been corporate-linked, and without warning, they'd been closed. My personal savings. Under legal review, they said. Rebecca had filed a claim suggesting I'd misappropriated family funds during my time as CFO. Nothing was true, of course, but truth doesn't stop the gears of a legal system greased by wealth. So I ended up here, behind this factory with no heating, no bathroom, and no doors that locked. The first few nights were the worst. I didn't sleep much. Every small sound made my heart jolt. Every shadow looked like a threat. But eventually, exhaustion swallowed fear. One night, I whispered aloud, "They took everything, except my silence." I don't know why I said it. Maybe just to hear something that still belonged to me. Inside the pocket of my coat, I kept 2 things. A notebook so worn the corners curled, and the blue ink pen from the office. I'd started using it as a bookmark. I hadn't written anything yet. My thoughts felt too fragmented, but just touching it gave me some strange sense of control. It was a Wednesday afternoon when someone spotted me. I was sitting on a crate just outside the loading dock, sipping from a paper cup someone had left on the sidewalk. That's when I saw her. Janet, from our marketing department. We'd worked together for nearly a decade. She was walking fast, scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. We made eye contact. She froze for half a second, just long enough for recognition to register, then pulled out her phone. She angled it slightly, pretending to check messages, but I saw the lens shift toward me. She didn't wave. She didn't say hello. She walked away quickly, tapping furiously at her screen. The next day, I stopped into a run-down coffee shop off 47th, hoping to warm my hands. A young guy at the next table was reading something on his phone. He turned it slightly, and I caught the headline over his shoulder. Ex-heiress, seen sleeping behind Chicago factory. Tragic fall of Reynolds' empire daughter. There was a grainy photo embedded in the post. I didn't have to squint. It was me. my knees drawn to my chest, coat pulled over my head like a failed shield. He must have noticed me staring because he clicked his screen off quickly and turned away. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. My body felt hollow, like the air was moving right through me. I thought rock bottom would feel like pain. But it didn't. It felt like silence, like standing in a room where everyone has left and no one's coming back. You stop trying to fight the noise because the world already stopped listening. That night, I stayed closer to the vents at the rear of the building. Steam rose from somewhere underground, probably old heating systems long abandoned. I sat cross-legged, watching it curl into the night sky. Years ago, this factory had been one of our first partnerships. We designed their new logo and helped restructure their debt. I'd even toured the facility once, smiling with the owner as I explained how family-owned businesses deserve to thrive. I traced the concrete floor with my shoe, remembering the spot where I'd once stood in heels, handing over a ribbon-cutting plaque. Funny how quickly places change meaning. The next morning, the fog rolled in heavy. I was collecting some dry cardboard from a nearby dumpster when I saw the car. Black. Clean. Not the kind that shows up here by accident. I stepped back, instincts on edge. The door opened slowly, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. He didn't look threatening, more like someone who'd just gotten lost on his way to a meeting. "Excuse me," he called, glancing down at a folded piece of paper. "Are you Clara Reynolds?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at him like he might be a hallucination. "Yes," I said finally, cautious. He walked closer, but not too close. "My name is Mr. Lowell. I'm a lawyer." "I've been looking for you." I tilted my head. "Why?" He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "Your late husband, before he passed, he left you something. A building downtown, a vineyard in Napa, and a financial inheritance, $82 million. I blinked. I didn't even know he had that kind of money. "Few people did," he replied. "He was discreet, but there's one condition." I didn't ask what it was. I just stood there, stunned, watching the lawyer's breath fog in the cold morning air. I hadn't spoken my husband's name in months. We'd been separated when he died, amicably but distantly. We hadn't ended things with bitterness, just space. And yet now, he'd left me something? This much? "Mr. Lowell handed me the envelope. I didn't open it. I couldn't yet. He gave a polite nod and walked back to the car. The tires crunched the gravel as the vehicle reversed, then slowly disappeared into the fog. I looked down at the letter in my hands, then at the pen now stained with blue ink that had leaked through my coat. For the first time in months, someone said my name, and it didn't sound like an insult. The next morning, I boarded a train to Napa, holding a letter that could change everything or ruin what little I had left. The windows were fogged, streaked with early dew, and I stared through them in silence as the city gave way to emptier roads and greener stretches. The rhythm of the train calmed something in me. I hadn't slept much, not really, but I wasn't tired, just paused. Like my whole life had stopped at a yellow light and didn't know whether to go or stay. Mr. Lowell picked me up at the station in a silver sedan that looked like it belonged to someone who preferred the back seat. He opened the passenger door for me without saying much, then turned down the radio to nothing but a soft hum. As we drove through the winding roads of Napa, the landscape opened wide. Rolling hills draped in vines, sleepy houses tucked into trees, and fog creeping low across the soil. It should have felt like peace. Instead, it felt like I'd been dropped into someone else's memory. "This place," I murmured. "It's too quiet." Mr. Lowell glanced over. "He said you'd say that." I didn't ask who he was. We both knew. "He bought the vineyard 4 years ago," Lowell continued. "Didn't tell many people. It was a personal project. Restoring something forgotten. He was always restoring things, I said. We fell into silence until the driveway curved toward a pale yellow farmhouse surrounded by rows of vines and a large wooden barn. It looked like a painting someone once gave me, a fake version of serenity. Inside, the air smelled like cedar and aged paper. Mr. Lowell led me into a small room with a single chair, a side table, and a leather folder already waiting. "Your husband," he began, "left behind 2 properties, this vineyard and a commercial building in downtown Chicago. Both are legally yours now, under one condition." I raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. I have to fight a dragon first?" He didn't laugh. "You must operate this vineyard yourself. For 6 months, no selling, no transferring. You have to run it, live it." I almost laughed again. Almost? "You mean I have to grow grapes and sell wine?" Lowell nodded. His words were very specific. He believed you needed something to rebuild, not just receive. "I was fired," I said quietly, "for building too much." There was nothing else to say. I signed the initial acceptance form with my old blue ink pen, still working, though the edges of the grip were sticky and worn. The ink bled slightly onto the paper, a quiet reminder of what else it had signed before. Later that afternoon, I met the vineyard staff. They were polite, but distant. Some nodded, others didn't. No one offered a smile. I noticed an older woman leaning against a wine barrel, her arms crossed tight over a thick sweater. She didn't say her name, but I didn't need it. "You're Clara," she finally said. "He used to talk about you. Said you were a dreamer who never stayed long enough to see things bloom." The words hit hard, harder than I let show. "Things change," I replied. "Do they?" she said, then walked away. That night, I sat alone in the house's small study. His study, technically. I hadn't touched anything yet. I didn't even sit in the desk chair. Just stood there, letting my eyes adjust to the dim lighting. The room smelled like him, sandalwood and old books. On the desk, tucked beneath a paperweight shaped like a compass, was a note, handwritten, sealed with a faded sticker that bore my initials. I opened it slowly. "You always saw value where no one else did. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The handwriting was unmistakably his. I folded the note carefully, slid it into my coat pocket, and turned toward the shelves. There were binders, invoices, dusty ledgers. I opened one, then another, then another. The vineyard was deep in debt. Maintenance deferred, sales projections collapsing, interest accruing. This wasn't a gift. It was a minefield. I should have felt furious or betrayed, but I didn't. Out on the porch, I poured a small glass of wine from the last labeled bottle I found. The taste was bold, a little bitter, like it had sat too long in silence. I looked out at the dark vines under the soft flicker of the porch light. The night was heavy with mist, like the earth was trying to hide something from the stars. "Maybe this is my second chance," I whispered. "Or maybe it's just another cruel joke dressed as kindness." Then I raised the glass. "To Michael," I said, though no one was listening. "Let's see what you left me." Thunder rumbled somewhere far off. The lights in the house flickered once, then steadied, and the pen in my pocket warmed slightly in my hand, as if ready to be used again. By the next morning, word had already spread through the valley. "The Reynolds girl is back, and she's running the place." I hadn't even left the property, and yet somehow I'd become the latest headline in the vineyard gossip circuit. It traveled faster than mold in the barrel house, subtle at first, then everywhere. At the local market, I stood in line behind 2 women picking over peaches. One of them leaned closer to the other and whispered, not quiet enough, "Guess they finally kicked her out of the city, came crawling back to play farmer's wife." I kept my eyes on the tomatoes in my cart, tightened my grip on the handle. My hands trembled just enough to make a lemon roll out and hit the floor. I didn't bother picking it up. They didn't stop talking. Poor thing. She used to walk into that fancy building downtown like she owned it. She did. For a while. Now she's stocking up on canned soup and praying for rain. I paid, didn't say a word, and loaded the groceries into the vineyard truck. The engine sputtered twice before starting, as if even the vehicle wasn't sure I belonged here. They used to print my name on the company's front gate, I thought. Now it's whispered like a warning. Back at the farmhouse, a thick envelope waited for me on the porch, propped against the door with a single red paperclip. The return address, my sister's law firm in Chicago. I took it inside, placed it gently on the kitchen table, and stared at it for longer than I'd admit. When I finally opened it, the contents weren't surprising, but they still hit like a closed fist. Rebecca was challenging the will. Her lawyers claimed Michael had been mentally compromised at the time of signing. They suggested I had exerted influence over him, despite our separation. They were grasping, but it was enough to put everything into question again. I reread the letter. Then again, I didn't flinch, didn't cry, but my breath changed. Each inhale slower, deliberate. They're not done taking from me, I thought. Not yet. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and painted the vineyard in a dusty gold, Martha found me near the main shed. She walked with purpose, arms swinging like she had something heavy to drop, and I was the target. "Clara," she said, no smile, "I need to know if we're getting paid next month." Her voice wasn't cruel, just tired. I didn't lie. "The accounts are almost dry. I'm looking into ways to fix it." She looked around at the workers pruning vines and checking barrels. People are getting nervous. They've seen this before. Someone shows up with promises, then leaves before the last harvest. "I'm not leaving," I said. She didn't answer, just nodded once, then walked back toward the barn. That night, the phone rang. My father. His tone was soft, measured, the same way he used to speak before handing down bad news. "You could still come home, Clara," he said. "Sign the vineyard over to Rebecca. We'll take care of everything. You've never been good with business decisions." I let the silence sit between us for a moment. I've had enough of being taken care of. I hung up. A second later, the lights flickered, then went out completely. A blown fuse, or maybe just bad timing. I lit a candle and sat at the table, the warm flicker casting shadows across the floor. Reaching for Michael's notebook, I turned the pages slowly, searching for something I hadn't seen before. There it was, a sketch in pencil. Restoration, Phase 1, written at the top in his neat handwriting. It wasn't just a dream. He'd planned to fix this place. He knew this place needed saving, I whispered. He knew I'd be the only one stubborn enough to try. I carried the notebook to the front porch and sat down. The moonlight draped across the fields, catching on tangled vines and crooked rows. They looked tired, worn, like me. But I didn't turn away, let them talk, let them doubt. I'd already lost everything once. This time, I had nothing left to fear. "They can laugh," I whispered. "But I'm not leaving again." The next morning came wrapped in a heavy fog that blanketed the hills like wet wool. I stood on the porch with my coffee cooling fast, trying to ignore the knot in my stomach. Martha had warned me before dawn, tapping lightly on the screen door, her voice half serious, half worried. "He's coming," she said. "Elias Ward." I knew the name. Everyone did. By mid-morning, the black Tesla rolled up the dirt road like it had no business getting dirty. It stopped neatly in front of the tasting room. When the door opened, out stepped a man who looked like he hadn't walked through grass in years. Shiny shoes, crisp slacks, designer sunglasses that stayed on even in the shade. "You must be Mrs. Reynolds," he said, flashing a perfect smile. "Beautiful property you've got. Shame it's drowning in debt." I didn't smile back. People like him never visit unless they already own half of what you have, I thought. He walked slowly, eyes skimming the building's paint chips, the uneven gravel. He wasn't admiring. He was assessing. We sat down inside the tasting room, where I'd cleared off a table and wiped down the old glass counter. He declined the wine I offered. Instead, he opened a leather folder, like this was just another client meeting. "Before your husband passed, he borrowed from us," Elias said, placing a document between us. "The debt transferred to you, legally, nothing personal." My hand hovered over the page but didn't touch it. "What do you want?" "A partnership," he replied, as if it were an olive branch. "You run the place. I cover the debt. In exchange, I take 60%. You keep 40, a small salary, and less stress." I looked him dead in the eye. "Would you offer this deal if my name were Michael instead of Clara?" He chuckled, pulling off his sunglasses. "Maybe not." "But that's business, isn't it?" He stayed another 10 minutes, talking percentages, marketing strategies, exit timelines. I said little, just listened, took the proposal and told him I'd consider it. He left the same way he came, spotless and untouchable. That evening, I found Martha near the tool shed, organizing pruning shears like she was preparing for war. "You shouldn't trust him," she said. "Ward has a reputation. Buys up struggling vineyards, runs them into the ground, and resells with his name on the label. That's how he plays." I nodded. I already knew. I stayed up late that night, at the old oak table, the vineyard dark outside the windows. No sound but the hum of the fridge and the wind brushing the shutters. I reread every page of the contract, legalese stacked like bricks, cold, impersonal, sharp. I picked up my blue ink pen, the same one from my first partnership contract, and drew a single, thin line beneath one clause. A veto power, granting me final say on any sale, any restructuring. It was quiet power, invisible unless you looked for it. I signed. The next morning, I walked into the tasting room, slid the contract across the counter where Elias stood, already sipping his overpriced espresso from a travel mug. "You've got yourself a deal, Mr. Ward," I said. "But I don't like being underestimated." He raised an eyebrow, glanced over the signature. "I never underestimate people. I just expect them to choose survival over pride." "Sometimes they choose both," I said. He smiled again, wider this time, but it still didn't reach his eyes. What he didn't know was that I'd already called Mr. Lowell the night before, faxed him every page for review, every clause, every line. My signature, the one Rebecca once used to erase me, now became my weapon. This wasn't luck. This was the first time I played offense since they pushed me out. That night, I sat out on the balcony with a half glass of last year's Cabernet. The vines whispered below in the breeze, swaying like old memories. "You taught me to stay quiet," I said to the wind. "But silence doesn't mean surrender." I placed the pen beside the wine. The ink and the liquid mirrored each other in the candlelight, same color, same weight, and then, for the first time in a long while, I smiled. A real one. Small, sure. The phone rang around 10. Elias. "Congratulations, Mrs. Reynolds," he said. "You've just made your first deal." I let the words hang a second. Then I answered, steady and clear. "Not my first, just the first one they can't take from me. But I should have known better. Men like Elias never stop until they own everything, including the people who refuse to sell." 2 months slid by faster than I expected. The vineyard was breathing again. Orders trickled in from restaurants I used to dine at when I was still somebody. Tourists returned, snapping photos near the old stone fountain. Even the air around here felt different, warmer, thicker with promise. Martha smiled more. I caught her laughing with one of the interns by the fermenting tanks last week. the kind of laugh that made you believe things might work out. But underneath it all, something was shifting. It started with the wine labels. Subtle at first. Different font, bolder color. Then a staff member was gone. No warning, no explanation, just replaced by someone who walked like they already knew the place better than I did. The invoices started arriving with a different letterhead, Elias's corporate logo tucked into the corner like it had always belonged there. Martha pulled me aside in the middle of a delivery. She kept her voice low, her eyes hard. "He's claiming credit for every bottle you've produced," she said. "Local buyers think this place is his now." I stared at the crates, freshly stamped with our name. And his. That's how they do it, I thought. They call it partnership, then rewrite history until you're a footnote. That night, I took the original contract out of my file drawer. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, as if even it felt older than it should be. I read it again, slowly, and that's when I saw it. Tucked deep in the third appendix, below a section I hadn't thought twice about, were performance clauses. If the vineyard didn't meet monthly revenue benchmarks no small vineyard could consistently hit, control shifted, quietly, permanently. He'd set me up, just like Rebecca did when she took over the firm, except this time it was disguised as help. The next morning, I found Elias in the tasting room, leaning back in one of the leather chairs like it was his second home. He swirled a glass of our reserve in his hand, breathing in the aroma like it meant something to him. "You should have read the fine print, Clara," he said without looking up. "You of all people should know that signatures have consequences." I didn't raise my voice, and so does silence. He smirked, but I didn't stay long enough to watch it fade. I walked out the back door and slid into my truck, gripping the wheel until my knuckles went pale. In the rearview mirror, my face was sliced by sunlight, a fractured version of myself, like a broken photo. "They think I'm the same woman they broke," I said aloud. "But that woman's gone." That night, I started logging everything, every shipment, every employee change, every phone call. I recorded our conversations, I documented the edits, I scanned contracts and emailed backups to myself twice over. I wasn't spiraling, I was preparing. The next storm came faster than expected. A courier dropped the letter off in the late afternoon. During bottling, Rebecca had filed suit. Allegations of fraud, mismanagement, investor deception. The charges read like a playbook of her own sins, rewritten with my name in ink. And backing her up, Elias Ward. Of course. I sat at my desk with the lawsuit in one hand and my blue ink pen in the other. I pressed the tip against the wood until it bled. But I didn't cry. I laughed. "Perfect," I said to no one. "Let's see what happens when they pick the wrong woman twice." I opened my notebook and scribbled one line under the day's date. "They taught me how to survive without trust. Now I'll show them how I survive without fear." As the vineyard settled into dusk, I walked to the office window and looked out across the rows of vines. They were crooked and dry in places, still recovering, but they stood tall, just like I was learning to do again. On my desk, the broken mirror I'd kept from my old house leaned beside the blue pen, 2 reminders of what had shattered and what still worked anyway. I caught my reflection. Worn, sure. "Still whole enough to fight," I whispered. Then I picked up the phone and called Mr. Lowell. "I want every file you have on Elias Ward and my sister," I told him. "This time, we don't wait to react." The next morning, a subpoena arrived. But it wasn't for me. It was for him. I was already up when Mr. Lowell called. The sun hadn't even touched the hills yet. My coffee was still too hot to drink. "We have enough," he said. "Forgery. Multiple counts. The judge signed off an hour ago. The subpoena's been served." I stared out my kitchen window as he spoke, watching fog slide down the vineyard rows like a ghost returning to old haunts. "Forgery?" I asked, even though I already knew. Backdated signatures, contracts altered, document tampering to strengthen his claim over the vineyard. He paused. All signed under your name, without your knowledge. My grip tightened around the mug, but my voice stayed calm. He taught me that signatures have power, I said. I'm teaching him what happens when they lie. By noon, it was all in motion. 3 days later, Elias showed up. He didn't call, didn't text. Just rolled into the driveway in that glossy black Tesla like he was still welcome. Martha spotted him first. She didn't say a word, just crossed her arms and watched from the tasting room window. He stepped out wearing the same smug half-smile and sunglasses he'd worn the day he first offered me a lifeline disguised as a leash. "Clara," he said too warmly, "let's not drag this through court. Think about what you're risking. Your reputation, the vineyard, everything you've rebuilt." I met him halfway down the path, boots still caked in dust from the morning's harvest. "I already lost everything once," I said, keeping my voice low. "Now I'm rebuilding it without you." He blinked, just once. Behind us, the staff had come outside, silent, alert. For the first time, they weren't just watching, they were choosing sides. By the end of that week, the story had broken. Elias Ward under investigation for fraudulent business practices. Headlines followed like wildfire. One by one, investors backed out. Rumors whispered through the valley like smoke, settling into corners where his name used to carry weight. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Then Rebecca called. "You've embarrassed this entire family," she hissed. "Dragging our name into this, on the news, in court. Do you think any of this makes you look strong?" I held the phone to my ear, but didn't respond right away. I let her words hang there, like damp laundry with no wind. "You humiliated me long before I ever spoke," I said finally. Then I hung up. The silence afterward was the cleanest air I'd breathed in years. 2 days later, Elias tried one last move. He leaked a story to the press, complete with unnamed sources and twisted timelines. The headlines painted me as manipulative, unstable, a grieving widow who'd coerced her husband into rewriting his will. But I was ready. That morning in court, Mr. Lowell brought in an old external drive. I'd forgotten about it until he slid it across the table to the judge. It contained a recording, grainy video, time-stamped 3 years before Michael's death. Michael himself explaining the terms of the will, clear-eyed and calm. "She'll try to fix what I couldn't," he said, pausing. "If you're watching this, and they're trying to take it from her, remember, this was my decision. Not hers. Mine." The courtroom held its breath. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just let go of a breath I'd been holding for too long. My hands trembled, not from fear, just from release. Justice doesn't shout. It breathes. During the recess, I sat in a quiet corner of the courthouse and opened my old notebook. I flipped past the pages smeared with wine, dust, and memory until I found the sentence I'd written months ago. "They think silence is weakness." With fresh blue ink, I circled it. Then, underneath, I added, "It's timing." By the time we stepped outside, the press had already gathered like vultures. Flashes lit up the sidewalk, microphones pointed in my direction. A voice cut through the chaos. "Clara, do you have anything to say to Mr. Ward or your family?" I paused for a breath, let the wind touch my face. Then I looked straight into the lens and said, "Tell them I'm just getting started. But victory has a price. And mine came the night I found the vineyard burning. It was just past midnight when the pounding started. I thought it was part of a dream at first, the kind that tricks you into believing you're still safe. Then Martha's voice cut through the darkness, sharp and panicked. Clara! The barrels! Everything's on fire! I didn't even grab a coat. I ran. The cold hit my face as soon as I stepped outside, but the heat coming from the warehouse was already overpowering. The sky glowed orange, thick smoke curling like a living thing against the stars. The air stank of burning oak and gasoline. The firefighters were already there, hoses cutting through the flames, but the wind carried the fire faster than they could control it. I could hear the wood crackling, the sound of years of work collapsing in minutes. I stood frozen, watching the storage building cave in on itself, flames bursting through the roof like the earth itself was screaming. My knees almost gave way, but I forced myself forward. Then I saw them, tire tracks, deep and fresh, leading away from the gravel road behind the vineyard. "This wasn't an accident," I whispered. By dawn, the fire was contained, but everything inside the warehouse was gone. Barrels, bottles, records, ashes. Only a blackened shell remained where the heart of my vineyard once stood. Martha sat beside me on the stone wall, her face streaked with soot and tears. "It's like watching a life end twice," she murmured. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I kept staring at the smoke rising from the last embers, my mind already piecing things together. Later that day, the investigators showed me footage from the security camera at the front gate. A single truck, Elias's assistant's, had driven onto the property 30 minutes before the blaze began. I called Elias myself. He answered on the first ring, voice smooth as ever. "Clara, I heard about the fire." "Tragic, really." "Your assistant's truck was here," I said flatly. He paused for half a second, just long enough. "You've made enough enemies, Clara. Don't pin this on me." The call ended before I could respond. I stared at the silent phone, fury curling in my stomach like a fist. But the next day brought a truth even uglier. The investigators traced the payment to the assistant's account, not from Elias, but from Rebecca, my sister. When Mr. Lowell called to confirm it, I laughed, a hollow, broken sound. Of course it was her. "She wanted to destroy the vineyard," he said quietly. "After the court case, after the news, she wanted you ruined for good." I walked out to what was left of the field, still smoldering. The vines near the warehouse were charred black, twisted like skeletons reaching for the sky. "She burned my second chance," I whispered, my voice barely holding, "just to prove I didn't need them." For the next 3 days, I didn't speak to anyone. I walked through the ruins alone, breathing in the smell of wet ash, each step crunched with reminders of what was gone. On the 4th morning, I saw a scrap of paper fluttering near one of the burned posts. I bent down and picked it up. It was from Michael's old notebook, the one I thought had been lost in the fire. Most of it was unreadable, but one line survived. "If it all burns, plant again." My chest tightened. I sank to my knees, clutching the fragment to my heart. "I hear you, Michael," I said softly. "I'm still here." That same afternoon, the insurance adjusters arrived. They sifted through the wreckage, taking photos and notes. Hours later, one of them approached me with a clipboard. "You're listed as the sole beneficiary," he said. "The payout amount, it's substantial. Your husband planned well." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "His policy was written years ago," the man continued. "If total loss ever occurred, you'd receive the full value of the vineyard, plus projected income for the next decade. It's enough to rebuild twice over." I stood there, unable to speak. When I told Martha, she whispered, "It's like he planned for this." I shook my head slowly. No, he just believed I'd rise when everything else fell. That night, I sat on the porch with a single candle burning beside me. The smoke still hung faintly in the air, mingling with the scent of crushed grapes. I reached into my pocket and found the blue ink pen, the same one I'd carried through every chapter of this war. It was half melted from the heat, the plastic warped, but the ink still flowed. I used it to sign the insurance papers, my hand trembling, but steady. "It's not about the money," I said quietly to Martha, who stood in the doorway watching me. "It's about ending the cycle." When she left, I walked down to the blackened soil where the first rose used to be. The ground was warm beneath my feet. I dug a small hole with my bare hands and planted a single vine cutting I'd saved in a jar of water on the kitchen counter. The earth smelled of smoke, but it also smelled alive. "They tried to take everything I had," I said to the empty fields. "They forgot. I know how to start from nothing." The sky was turning pale, the kind of gray that comes just before sunrise. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of rain and renewal. For the first time in weeks, I smiled, not because I had won, but because I had survived long enough to begin again. As the first light touched the scorched rose, I pressed the melted pen into the dirt beside the vine, like a marker. A reminder. Everything that was burned could still grow again. A year later, when the first grapes bloomed again, I invited them all back to witness what survival looks like. The morning air was crisp, golden light spilling over vine leaves. The rebuilt tasting room stood proud, new oak beams, fresh lavender in window boxes, and a glass door through which the valley stretched like a living painting. I stood near the entrance, dressed in simple jeans and a white blouse, calm but with a gravity I hadn't dared carry before. Invitations had gone out months earlier, to my parents, to Rebecca, to Elias, and to neighbors who once whispered behind their hands. Many showed up, some out of curiosity, others with regret etched in their faces. I let them come, because this time I wanted the narrative to close on my terms. They arrived one by one. Rebecca in a tailored suit, scanning the grounds as though determining whether I deserved this. My parents hovered near the gate, uncertain how to act, like strangers in a story they thought they owned. Journalists lined up outside, cameras ready. A reporter stepped forward, mic in hand. "Clara, you're often called the woman who rebuilt from ashes. What would you say to that?" I smiled politely, eyes lifting to greet the crowd. "No," I said. "I just stopped letting other people decide what ruins meant." A hush fell. Rebecca shifted at my side. My father coughed. The distance between us felt both familiar and insurmountable. Rebecca approached carefully. "So you did it. You got lucky," she said, voice steady but brittle. I looked at her, not with anger but clarity. "Luck," I said, "is what people call it when hard work makes them uncomfortable." She opened her mouth to speak. "Clara, we didn't mean—" But I raised a hand. "You don't owe me an apology," I said softly, letting my words settle in the cool air. "You owe me honesty. That's harder." A ripple of tension passed through the crowd. Some eyes dampened. Some looked away. Then I led everyone toward the wine cellar at the back. On a small table stood the blue ink pen, cleaned after the fire, and beside it, a slightly singed photograph of Michael and me in an earlier life, smiling under softer lights. I lifted my glass, letting the sun catch in the pale red liquid. To second chances, and to never needing anyone's permission to take them. Applause broke, gentle at first, then more earnest. Even Rebecca's eyes glistened before she turned away. The crowd dispersed eventually. Some lingered to talk about the vines, the new oak barrel displays, the richness of the soil. Others drifted off toward their cars, uncertain whether to congratulate or depart quietly. When the doors closed and only vines remained, I walked among them. The soil still smelled faintly of smoke, but green pushed through blackened earth. The vines I had planted after the fire stood firm, small but alive. I sat on a low bench under a fading sun, journal in hand. With the same blue pen that had woven through every chapter of my journey, I wrote, They said I was never meant to lead anything, but maybe I was meant to rebuild. I closed the notebook, exhaled, and let a gentle smile form. Not a victory smile, but a peace smile. A slight movement caught my eye. A small bird landed near the very vine I'd planted on the night the fire ended. It trembled in the cool air, looked at me, then took flight. I watched it go. "Free, just like me," I whispered. I looked out over the vineyard, green, full, alive. The rows stretched outward, a quiet testimony. They can burn what I build, but they can't erase who I became. And for the first time in my life, I didn't need anyone to say my name. I knew exactly who I was,